The convoy stretched behind her like a steel serpent winding through the Russian mud. 300 American trucks carrying the hope of nations on their axles. Madison Brooks gripped the steering wheel of her lead Studebaker US-6 until her knuckles went white, her eyes scanning the tree line where German snipers had been reported just hours before. The weight of command sat heavy on her 26-year-old shoulders, not just the responsibility for these trucks and their precious cargo of ammunition, food, and medical supplies, but the knowledge that the entire Soviet offensive against Army Group Center depended on what she and her drivers could accomplish in the next 72 hours. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Brooks to all units, she spoke into the radio handset, her voice steady despite the flutter of fear in her chest. Maintain 20-meter intervals. Air cover reports German reconnaissance planes heading east. They haven't spotted us yet. But stay alert. The static crackled with acknowledgments from her convoy commanders, each one a woman who had fought bureaucracy, prejudice, and military tradition to earn her place behind the wheel. They called themselves the Daughters of Thunder. These 300 female truck drivers who had volunteered for the most dangerous supply mission of the Eastern Front. Madison had handpicked every single one of them, training them herself in the art of defensive driving, basic vehicle maintenance, and when absolutely necessary, how to fight through the mud-splattered windshield. She could see the forest giving way to open farmland, fields that had once grown wheat and sunflowers now scarred by artillery craters and the burned-out husks of tanks. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Marshal Zhukov's forces were preparing for the assault that would finally break the German lines and begin the long push toward Berlin. But without ammunition, without fuel, without food, the greatest army in the world was just a collection of desperate, starving men. Madison thought of her brother, James, killed at Stalingrad 2 years ago, while serving as a liaison officer with the Red Army. His last letter had spoken of the courage of Soviet soldiers, their determination to defend every inch of their homeland, but also of their desperate need for supplies. "We have the will to win," he'd written. But will alone doesn't stop tanks or feed armies. Those words had driven Madison to volunteer for this mission, to convince the skeptical generals that women could handle the most critical supply operation of the war. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was urgent, panicked. "Lead vehicle, this is position 5. We've got movement in the woods, north side, approximately 500 meters. Madison's training took over. All units, combat interval now. Gunners to positions." She grabbed the Thompson submachine gun from the rack beside her seat as her co-driver, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, swung the mounted .50 caliber machine gun toward the threat. "Position 5, this is Brooks. Can you identify the contact?" "Negative, ma'am. Could be partisans, could be weight. I see German field gray. Looks like a patrol, maybe a platoon." Madison's mind raced through the tactical situation. They were still 60 kilometers from the forward Soviet positions, deep in contested territory where German units were desperately trying to retreat westward, while maintaining enough cohesion to avoid complete collapse. A platoon shouldn't be enough to stop 300 trucks, but if they had radio contact with larger units, this entire mission could be compromised. "All units, maintain course and speed," Madison ordered, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Gunners, fire only on my command or if fired upon. We're not stopping unless we have to." The German patrol emerged from the tree line, 30 or 40 soldiers in the ragged remains of Wehrmacht uniforms, their faces gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. For a long moment, the two forces faced each other across the muddy field. 300 American trucks, driven by women who had crossed an ocean to fight in someone else's war, and a handful of German soldiers who looked like they wanted nothing more than to surrender and go home. Then, from somewhere in the German ranks, a young officer, he couldn't have been more than 19, raised his rifle and fired. The bullet shattered Madison's side mirror, sending fragments of glass spraying across the cab. Sarah Chun didn't hesitate. The .50 caliber roared to life, stitching a line of destruction across the field that sent the German soldiers diving for cover. All along the convoy, mounted machine guns opened fire, creating a wall of lead that turned the muddy ground into a killing field. "Cease fire!" Madison shouted into the radio. "Cease fire, goddammit! They're retreating!" The German patrol was indeed falling back into the forest, dragging their wounded with them, the young officer who had fired the first shot lying motionless in the mud. Madison felt a surge of regret mixed with grim satisfaction. She hadn't wanted this, hadn't wanted to add more death to a war that had already consumed millions. But she'd made a promise to her brother's memory, to the Soviet soldiers waiting for these supplies, to herself. This convoy would reach its destination, no matter what stood in its way. "Damage report," she called out, already surveying her own vehicle. The mirror could be replaced, if they had time. More importantly, none of the tires had been hit, and the engine still ran smooth and strong. The responses came back one by one: minor damage to 3 trucks, some bullet holes and cargo tarps, but nothing that would slow them down. No casualties among her drivers, though Lieutenant Anna Petrov in position 12 reported that a round had passed through her jacket sleeve without touching skin. They had been incredibly lucky. Madison glanced at Sarah, whose hands were still gripping the machine gun, her breathing rapid but controlled. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, her Chinese-American features set in determined lines. "First time I've shot at actual people instead of targets. Feels different." "It always does," Madison replied, thinking of her own first firefight 3 weeks ago, when bandits had tried to hijack a smaller supply convoy near Minsk. She'd killed 2 men that day, and their faces still visited her dreams. But we don't have the luxury of feeling too much about it. Not until this war is over. The convoy rumbled onward, leaving the skirmish behind like just another mile marker on the road to victory. Madison knew they'd been fortunate. The German patrol had been disorganized, probably deserters or stragglers from a broken unit. But this close to the front lines, encounters would become more frequent and more dangerous. She needed her drivers alert and ready for anything. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The relatively intact farmland gave way to areas that showed the true face of war: villages reduced to rubble, roads cratered by artillery, the burned-out remains of military vehicles on both sides littering the roadside, like monuments to mankind's capacity for destruction. Occasionally, they passed columns of Soviet troops moving east toward the assembly areas, soldiers who would launch the offensive that these supplies would sustain. The troops watched the convoy pass with expressions ranging from surprise to outright disbelief at seeing women driving military trucks through a war zone. Madison had grown accustomed to those looks over the past 6 months. She'd seen them in England, where she'd first volunteered for military service in 1942, fresh from a college degree in mechanical engineering and burning with rage over her brother's death. She'd seen them during her training as a transport driver, where instructors had assumed she was there to drive generals to parties rather than supplies to combat zones. She'd seen them when she'd proposed the all-female convoy to General Eisenhower's logistics staff, who had laughed until she'd presented her detailed plan, complete with driver qualifications, vehicle maintenance protocols, and tactical considerations for operating in contested territory. The plan had been audacious, perhaps even reckless. Stalin's desperate requests for more Lend-Lease supplies had reached a critical point in early 1944. The Trans-Persian Railway was running at maximum capacity. The Arctic convoys to Murmansk faced constant U-boat threats, and the newly opened supply route through Alaska and Siberia was still establishing itself. But there was another option, one that required guts, determination, and a willingness to drive through some of the most dangerous territory in the world. Madison had proposed assembling a specialized convoy of American trucks to make a direct supply run from newly liberated Poland through Belarus and into Russia, delivering critical supplies directly to Zhukov's forces preparing for the summer offensive. The route would take them through territory that was barely secured, where German units were still active, where partisan fighters controlled the forests, and where the roads themselves could kill a careless driver. The generals had loved the audacity of it, but balked at the risk. That's when Madison had played her trump card: recruit only female drivers, women who had been relegated to rear echelon roles despite their skills, women who were desperate to prove themselves capable of anything their male counterparts could do. If the mission succeeded, it would be a propaganda victory as well as a logistical one. If it failed, well, the military could always claim it had been a humanitarian mission gone wrong, minimizing the strategic embarrassment. Madison had trained them relentlessly, turning a collection of individual drivers into a cohesive unit. They learned to drive in formation, to maintain vehicles under combat conditions, to navigate by dead reckoning when roads disappeared or maps proved useless. They practiced defensive tactics, learning how to use their vehicles as weapons when necessary, how to create improvised barricades, how to extract themselves from ambushes. The training had been grueling, and not everyone made it through. Madison had started with 400 volunteers and cut that number to 300 through a selection process that tested not just skills but also mental resilience and team cohesion. The women who remained were the best drivers in the U.S. military, regardless of gender, and Madison was fiercely proud of each one. Now, 6 months after that initial recruitment drive, 3 months after the final selection, and 1 week into the actual mission, Madison watched her convoy navigate through the scarred landscape of Eastern Europe and felt the weight of every decision she'd made. These women trusted her, followed her orders without question, and believed in the mission as deeply as she did. She wouldn't let them down. The radio crackled with Anna's voice from position 12. Lead vehicle, this is Petrov. I'm picking up civilian traffic ahead, refugees by the look of it. How do you want to handle? Madison checked her map, comparing it to the terrain visible through her windshield. They were approaching what had been a mid-sized town before the war, now likely a collection of ruins filled with displaced civilians trying to survive in the wasteland between armies. Refugees were a complicating factor. They clogged roads, created unpredictable situations, and sometimes included enemy infiltrators. All units, reduce speed to 15 kilometers per hour, Madison ordered. Maintain formation but watch for civilians on the road. We're not stopping unless absolutely necessary, but we're not running anyone over either. Gunners stay alert, remember. German infiltrators sometimes use refugee columns as cover. The convoy slowed as they approached the outskirts of the town. Madison could see them now, hundreds of people, maybe thousands, moving westward like a human river flowing against the tide of war. They carried their lives in bundles and carts, their faces hollow with exhaustion and trauma. Old men pushed wheelbarrows filled with family heirlooms. Women carried children who were too young to walk. Teenagers hauled improvised sledges, loaded with everything from furniture to farm tools. The sight hit Madison like a physical blow. She'd seen refugees before, but never in such numbers, never so clearly broken by the machinery of war. These were the people this convoy was supposed to help, the civilians caught between armies who needed the war to end more desperately than any soldier. If her mission succeeded, if Zhukov's offensive broke the German lines, these people might finally be able to go home. The crowd parted slowly to let the convoy through. People pressing to the sides of the road and staring at the American trucks with expressions of wonder and confusion. Madison heard children asking their parents about the strange vehicles, heard adults speculating about where so many trucks could be going. A few waved, their gestures carrying a desperate hope that any Allied force might somehow end their suffering. Then Madison saw her, a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, standing at the roadside with a baby in her arms. The woman's eyes locked with Madison's through the windshield, and in that instant, Madison saw her brother's death reflected in a stranger's face. This woman had lost someone too. It was written in every line of her expression, in the way she held that child like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. Madison made a decision that went against her orders, against her better judgment, against every tactical consideration. She grabbed a field ration pack from under her seat and leaned out the window as her truck drew, even with the young mother. "For your baby," she said in halting Russian, Anna having taught her basic phrases. She tossed the package, and the woman caught it with reflexes sharpened by desperate need. The young mother stared at the ration pack, then up at Madison with tears streaming down her face. "Spasibo," she whispered, "thank you." And Madison felt something break inside her chest, some wall she'd built to keep the horror of war at arm's length. "Lead vehicle, what are you doing?" Sarah's voice was soft, concerned. "Being human," Madison replied, reaching for another ration pack. She tossed it to an elderly couple huddled by the roadside, then another to a teenage boy trying to protect two younger siblings. "Pass the word back, anyone who wants to spare a ration pack. Do it now. We have enough, and these people have nothing." The order rippled through the convoy, and soon ration packs were flying from truck windows like gifts from unlikely angels. The refugees scrambled for them with desperate gratitude, their faces transforming from exhaustion to something approaching hope. It was a small thing, barely a drop in the ocean of suffering. But Madison saw it matter in those individual moments of connection. They cleared the town 20 minutes later, leaving the refugee column behind, but carrying the memory forward. Madison knew she'd broken protocol, potentially compromised their supplies, and set a precedent that could be problematic in future encounters. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd done the right thing. War wasn't just about tactics and strategy, it was about remembering your humanity in the face of inhuman destruction. "Brooks to all units," she said into the radio. "Good work back there. We're soldiers, yes, but we're also human beings. Never forget that." The acknowledgments came back laden with emotion. These women understood what she meant, understood that the mission wasn't just about delivering supplies, but about maintaining their own souls in the process. As afternoon turned to evening, Madison consulted her map and calculated their position. They were making good time, better than expected actually, and if they could maintain this pace through the night, they'd reach the Soviet forward positions by tomorrow afternoon. But night driving in contested territory carried its own risks: reduced visibility, increased chance of mechanical failure, the possibility of driving into an ambush. "Lead vehicle. This is Montgomery." Beth's voice crackled through from position 20. "I'm reading the terrain ahead, and I don't like what I'm seeing. We've got a river crossing coming up in about 10 kilometers, and if that bridge is damaged, we're going to have problems." Madison swore under her breath. She'd studied the route exhaustively, but maps from this region were often outdated, and bridges had a habit of being destroyed during combat operations. "Can we find an alternate crossing?" "There's a ford marked about 20 kilometers north," Beth replied. "But in this season, with the spring runoff, it might be too deep for safe passage. All units, prepare for possible delay," Madison announced. "We'll assess the bridge situation when we get there. Maintenance crews, be ready to make emergency repairs if needed." The convoy pushed forward through the gathering dusk, headlights cutting through the gloom like searchlights. Madison hated using the lights. They made the convoy visible for miles. But the alternative was driving blind on roads that could kill you with a single wrong turn. They compromised by using only parking lights, except for the lead vehicle. trusting Madison to navigate for everyone. The bridge appeared in the headlights like a skeleton rising from the river still standing. But barely. German engineers had tried to blow it during their retreat, and while they'd failed to completely destroy it, they'd succeeded in making it dangerously unstable. The central span sagged ominously, and Madison could see where support beams had been cut or damaged by explosives. "All units halt," Madison ordered. She climbed down from her truck, Sarah following with a flashlight, and approached the bridge on foot. The river rushed beneath the damaged structure, swollen with spring melt and moving fast enough to sweep away anyone unlucky enough to fall in. Rosa Martinez appeared at her elbow, the mechanic's trained eye already assessing the damage. "It'll hold, maybe," Rosa said in her Texas drawl. "But not all at once. We'll have to cross one vehicle at a time, and even then, we're risking collapse. What about reinforcement?" Madison asked. "Can we shore it up enough to be safe?" Rosa walked onto the bridge, testing each plank before committing her weight, her flashlight playing over the damaged supports. "Give me 2 hours and half our lumber supplies, and I can make it safer. Can't guarantee it won't fail, but I can improve the odds." Madison checked her watch. 1900 hours. 2 hours would put them crossing in full darkness, exhausted from a day of hard driving, working against a deadline that was already tight. But the alternative was risking a catastrophic bridge collapse that could cost lives and destroy irreplaceable vehicles and supplies. "Do it," Madison decided. "Montgomery, Chun, Petrov, get your crews organized for bridge reinforcement. Everyone else, establish a defensive perimeter and get some rest while you can. We'll cross starting at 2100 hours, one vehicle every 5 minutes." The convoy transformed into a construction site, as women who had been driving all day now turned to carpentry and engineering. They worked by flashlight and moonlight, cutting lumber salvaged from destroyed buildings, bracing damaged supports, creating a lattice of reinforcement that might keep the bridge standing long enough for 300 trucks to cross. Madison worked alongside them, her engineering degree finally finding practical application. She calculated load distributions, stress points, and safety margins, translating theoretical knowledge into practical solutions. Sarah welded broken supports with a portable acetylene torch. Anna coordinated the work crews with the efficiency of a foreman. Beth tested each reinforcement with her uncanny sense for structural integrity. At 20:45 hours, Rosa declared the bridge as safe as they could make it. "It's not perfect," she admitted, "but it's better than it was. If the vehicles cross slowly, one at a time, with weight distributed properly, we should be okay." Should being the operative word. Madison stared at the reinforced bridge, then at the river rushing beneath it. One wrong move, one structural failure, and this entire mission could end in disaster. But they were out of alternatives and out of time. "All units, prepare to cross," she announced. "I'll take lead vehicle across first. If the bridge holds my weight, the rest of you follow 5-minute intervals, exactly as practiced. Gunners, stay alert. This is an ideal ambush location." Sarah touched her arm. "Let me drive across first. If something happens, you'll need to lead this convoy the rest of the way," Madison interrupted. "I'm the commanding officer, Sarah. I go first." "That's not negotiable." She climbed back into her truck, hands steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. The engine rumbled to life, and Madison eased the Studebaker onto the bridge, feeling it sag and groan under the weight. The reinforcements held, but she could hear wood creaking, metal straining, the bridge protesting every meter of progress. Halfway across, a support beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Madison's heart stopped, but the emergency bracing held, redistributing the load to other supports. She kept moving, steady pressure on the accelerator, praying to gods she wasn't sure she believed in. Then she was across, wheels hitting solid ground on the far side. and Madison released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Lead vehicle across safely," she radioed back. "Next vehicle, proceed." One by one, the trucks crossed the damaged bridge. Madison watched each one with her heart in her throat, counting down the vehicles like a mother counting children. Sarah came across in the second vehicle, then Anna, then Beth. The mechanics crossed. The radio operators, the veterans, and the rookies dotted vehicle number 287. Disaster struck. A main support beam finally gave way, and the bridge lurched sideways. The driver, Private Lisa Reynolds from Ohio, fought the wheel, managing to keep her truck from plunging into the river, but the vehicle's rear wheels broke through the roadbed. The truck hung there, half on the bridge and half over empty air, engine roaring as Reynolds tried to power through. "Everyone, hold position," Madison shouted into the radio. She was already running back toward the bridge, Rosa and a repair crew on her heels. If they lost this vehicle, they'd lose not just the truck, but also the critical medical supplies it carried: morphine, plasma, surgical instruments that couldn't be replaced. Madison reached the damaged section and assessed the situation in seconds. The truck's rear axle was caught on a broken support beam, holding it in place but preventing forward movement. Below, the river waited to swallow everything if they made a wrong move. "Reynolds, shut off the engine," Madison called up to the cab. "Don't try to drive out. You'll break the beam and drop straight into the river." The engine cut off, leaving only the sound of rushing water and creaking wood. Madison turned to Rosa. "Can we winch her out?" Rosa was already calculating angles and weight distributions. "If we can get a cable attached to a solid anchor point, maybe. But we'll need to do it fast. That beam won't hold much longer." Beth appeared with a cable from one of the recovery vehicles. "I've got a winch truck positioned on solid ground, 40 meters back. If we can get this cable attached to Reynolds' front axle, we might be able to pull her clear." Madison didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the damaged bridge section, feeling it shift under her weight, and began working her way toward Reynolds' truck. Behind her, she heard Sarah's voice shouting something about waiting for safety equipment, but there was no time for that. Every second increased the chance of total collapse. The bridge groaned ominously as Madison reached the truck's hood. She could see Reynolds through the windshield, the young driver's face pale with fear but holding steady. "I'm going to attach a cable to your front axle," Madison called up. "When I give the signal, put her in neutral and let the winch do the work. Understand?" Reynolds nodded, her trust in Madison absolute despite the terror in her eyes. Madison lowered herself over the front of the truck, dangling above the river as she worked the cable around the front axle. Her fingers were clumsy with cold and adrenaline, but training took over. Muscle memory guiding movements she'd practiced 100 times in safer conditions. The cable secured, she hauled herself back up onto the bridge and waved to the winch operator. "Take it slow and steady," she shouted. The cable went taut and Reynolds' truck began to move backward, inch by agonizing inch. The broken support beam groaned, shifted, and then, with a crack that echoed across the river, gave way completely. For a heart-stopping instant, Madison thought they'd lost both the truck and Reynolds. But the cable held, and the winch pulled the vehicle back onto stable bridge decking. Just as the section where it had been stuck collapsed into the river, Reynolds emerged from the cab on shaking legs, and Madison grabbed her in a fierce embrace. "You held steady up there." "Good work. I thought I was dead," Reynolds whispered. "I thought, but you're not," Madison said firmly. "You're alive, the truck's intact, and we're still on mission. That's what matters." With the damaged section of bridge now completely gone, crossing was impossible for the remaining 13 vehicles. But Rosa had already spotted a solution. The ford Beth had mentioned was only 20 kilometers north, and if they moved quickly, they could reach it before midnight. "Change of plans," Madison announced. "Final 13 vehicles will detour to the northern ford. Everyone else, continue east. We'll reunite at checkpoint Delta 7. Let's move, people." The convoy split, and Madison watched the trailing vehicles head north with a mixture of pride and worry. She divided her force in enemy territory, always a risky move. But the alternative was abandoning those vehicles and their critical supplies. The mission came first, always. The reunited convoy would push through the night, racing against time and exhaustion, heading toward a rendezvous with destiny on the Eastern Front. Madison climbed back into her truck, every muscle aching, and pointed them east toward the distant sound of artillery fire. The real test, she knew, was still ahead. 17 hours later, caked in mud and running on 2 hours of sleep, Madison's convoy rolled into the Soviet forward staging area near Vitebsk. The reunion with the 13 vehicles from the northern forward had gone smoothly, and now all 300 trucks sat in neat rows, engines cooling. Drivers slumped over steering wheels in exhaustion. A Soviet colonel approached Madison's truck, his expression transforming from skepticism to amazement as he counted the vehicles and checked the manifests. Captain Brooks," he said in accented but serviceable English. "Moscow informed us to expect supplies, but we thought perhaps 50 trucks, maybe 100. This is beyond our expectations." Madison climbed down from her truck, her legs nearly buckling under her. "Colonel, we've brought 300 trucks loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, food, and vehicle parts. Everything Marshal Zhukov requested for the offensive. Where do you want us to unload?" The colonel's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. 300 trucks, driven by women, across contested territory. "The commissars will not believe this when I file my report." "The commissars can believe whatever they want," Madison replied with a tired smile. "What matters is that you've got your supplies. Now my women need food, rest, and a secure perimeter. After that, we'll help with unloading and distribution." As Soviet soldiers began the massive task of cataloging and distributing the supplies, Madison gathered her commanders for a briefing. They met in the back of a supply truck converted to a mobile command post, maps spread across makeshift tables, exhaustion etched in every face. "We did it," Sarah said, disbelief coloring her words. "We actually did it." "We did more than that," Anna added. "We proved that women can handle combat logistics as well as any man. Maybe better." Beth, ever practical, brought them back to reality. "We still have to get these trucks back to Allied lines. The mission's only half complete." Madison nodded. "True, but we've bought ourselves some time. The Soviets won't need us to move again for at least a week. They have to distribute these supplies and finalize their offensive plans. That gives us time to perform maintenance, rest, and prepare for the return journey." "Will we take the same route back?" Rosa asked, her mechanic's mind already cataloging the repairs needed on various vehicles. "Unlikely," Madison replied, studying the map. "By the time we're ready to move, Zhukov's offensive will have started. The entire tactical situation will be different. We'll need to coordinate with both Soviet and Allied intelligence to find the safest route." Maggie, the radio operator, spoke up. "I've been monitoring Allied communications. There's talk of us in the radio traffic, the ghost convoy they're calling us. Apparently, German intelligence reported our movement, but couldn't believe the convoy was real when they couldn't find us on follow-up reconnaissance." "Let them think we're ghosts," Madison said with grim satisfaction. "The less the Germans know about our capabilities, the better." The meeting broke up, and Madison found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time in days. She thought about her brother James, wondered what he would think of what she'd accomplished. Would he be proud? Would he understand that she'd done this partly for him, partly for the cause, and partly to prove to herself that she was capable of more than society expected? A commotion outside drew her attention. She emerged from the truck to find Marshal Georgy Zhukov himself striding through the staging area, his distinctive features unmistakable even from a distance. The Soviet commander stopped before Madison's truck, his eyes taking in the scene, 300 American vehicles, crews of exhausted but triumphant women, and the supplies that would fuel his next offensive. Captain Brooks? His English was rougher than the colonel's, but understandable. I am told you command this remarkable convoy. Madison snapped a salute, which Zhukov returned crisply. Yes, sir. Captain Madison Brooks, United States Army. We've delivered 300 trucks with full supply loads as requested. Zhukov studied her with eyes that had seen every horror of this war. I have daughters, he said finally. When this war started, I thought I fought to keep them safe, to preserve a world where they could have normal lives. Now I see daughters everywhere on the front lines, in factories, driving trucks through war zones. The world has changed, Captain, and perhaps not all changes are bad. He extended his hand, and Madison shook it, understanding the significance of the gesture. This was one of the Soviet Union's greatest military commanders, acknowledging her achievement, recognizing her not as a curiosity or an anomaly, but as a fellow soldier. Your supplies will help us drive the fascists from our soil, Zhukov continued. More than supplies, though, you have shown what is possible when people fight for what they believe in. This matters, Captain Brooks. This matters very much. After Zhukov departed, Madison gathered her drivers for a proper briefing. They assembled in a field beside the staging area, 300 women who had driven through hell and emerged triumphant. Looking at them, these mechanics and drivers, farm girls and factory workers, immigrants and native-born Americans, Madison felt a surge of pride that nearly overwhelmed her. We've completed the first phase of our mission, she began, her voice carrying across the assembled group. 300 trucks, 600 tons of supplies, delivered intact to Soviet forces preparing for a major offensive. Every single one of you performed beyond expectations. You drove through contested territory, fought when necessary, helped refugees, saved each other, and kept this mission on track despite every obstacle. She paused, seeing the impact of her words reflected in tired but proud faces. The generals who doubted us are eating their words right now. The skeptics who said women couldn't handle combat logistics are proven wrong. You've written history, every single one of you, and no one can ever take that away. A cheer went up, spontaneous and heartfelt, 300 voices raised in triumph. Madison let it wash over her, understanding that this moment, more than any official recognition, more than any medal or commendation, was what mattered. These women knew what they'd accomplished, and that knowledge would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The week that followed brought an illusion of peace that Madison knew better than to trust. Her drivers rested in a Soviet supply depot converted into temporary quarters, sleeping in actual beds for the first time in weeks. Mechanics worked around the clock performing maintenance on vehicles that had been pushed beyond their limits, replacing worn parts, patching bullet holes, and ensuring every truck would be ready for the journey home. Madison spent her days coordinating with Soviet logistics officers, planning the return route that would take them back through territory now transformed by war's fluid dynamics. Each evening, she walked through the camp, checking on her drivers, listening to their concerns, ensuring morale remained high despite the uncertainty of what came next. It was during one of these evening rounds that she encountered Captain Natasha Volkhov, a Red Army liaison officer assigned to coordinate with Allied forces. Natasha was perhaps 30 years old, with sharp features weathered by years of combat and eyes that had witnessed atrocities Madison could only imagine. She spoke English with a British accent, the product of pre-war education in London, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned her rank through battlefield competence rather than political connections. Captain Brooks, Natasha called out as Madison passed the Soviet command tent. A moment of your time? Madison approached, curious about what the Soviet officer wanted. Their previous interactions had been cordial but purely professional, focused on supply distribution and security arrangements. Walk with me, Natasha suggested, leading Madison away from the camp toward a small rise overlooking the staging area. Below them, 300 American trucks sat in neat rows, moonlight reflecting off their windshields like a field of stars. Impressive sight, is it not? All those vehicles, all those possibilities. They're just trucks, Madison replied. Sensing there was more to this conversation than admiration for military hardware, Natasha smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They are never just trucks, Captain. They represent mobility, supply capacity, strategic flexibility. Right now, they represent the difference between Marshal Zhukov's offensive succeeding or failing. She paused, studying Madison's reaction. Which is why I must warn you, there are those who do not want you to take them home. Madison felt ice form in her stomach. Explain. There is a faction within the Soviet command structure, Natasha said carefully, that believes these trucks should remain here, become part of the Red Army's permanent logistics capability. They argue that your mission was to deliver supplies, and that mission is complete. The trucks themselves, they claim, should be considered part of the Lend-Lease program. That's not how Lend-Lease works, Madison protested. These vehicles are on loan, to be returned after use. We have specific orders to bring them back to Allied lines. Orders mean different things in different armies, Captain Brooks. In the Red Army, orders can be reinterpreted based on political necessity. And there are powerful people who see your trucks as a political necessity. Madison's mind raced through the implications. Without the trucks, her drivers would be stranded deep in Soviet territory, dependent on the Red Army for transportation back to Allied lines. The mission that had been designed to prove women's capabilities would end in failure, or at least in the appearance of failure. The propaganda value alone would be devastating. Who specifically wants to keep the trucks? Madison asked. Natasha hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Commissar Volkhov. He is attached to Zhukov's staff, responsible for political oversight and ensuring adherence to Soviet policy. He believes that keeping your convoy would demonstrate Soviet strength and Allied dependence on Soviet success. He also... She paused. He does not approve of women in combat roles. Your success troubles him ideologically. Wonderful, Madison muttered. A commissar with both political and personal reasons to sabotage us. Zhukov himself opposes Volkov's position, Natasha added quickly. The Marshal respects what you have accomplished and understands the importance of maintaining Allied cooperation. But even Zhukov must navigate political realities. If Volkhov can build enough support in Moscow, even the Marshal's authority may not be sufficient to protect your convoy. Madison stared out at her trucks, each one representing not just a vehicle but also the trust her superiors had placed in her. The faith her drivers had shown, the proof of capability she'd promised to deliver. She'd driven through German patrols, across damaged bridges, through refugee columns, and now she faced an enemy she couldn't fight with weapons or tactics. What do you suggest? She asked Natasha. Make yourselves indispensable, Natasha replied. The offensive begins in 4 days. If your trucks prove critical to its success, if Soviet commanders come to depend on your convoy's capabilities, Volkhov will find it much harder to justify keeping vehicles that are actively contributing to victory. But this means your drivers must be willing to remain in the combat zone, to support Soviet operations during the most dangerous phase of the campaign. You're asking me to volunteer my people for combat operations beyond our original mission. I am asking you to save your mission by expanding it, Natasha corrected. Volkhov expects you to remain static, to simply wait for orders to depart. If instead you demonstrate continued value, you create a situation where keeping your trucks becomes strategically foolish rather than politically convenient. Madison considered the proposal, weighing risks against potential rewards. Her orders had been clear: deliver the supplies and return to Allied lines. Remaining in the combat zone violated those orders, but losing the trucks would mean mission failure anyway. Sometimes, she realized, you had to break the rules to fulfill the spirit of your mission. I'll need to discuss this with my senior officers, Madison said. But Natasha, why are you telling me this? You're Soviet military. Why warn me against your own command structure? Natasha's expression softened slightly, revealing a humanity beneath the military bearing. Because I have watched this war consume everything I loved, everyone I knew. My parents died in the siege of Leningrad. My brothers fell at Kursk. My husband was killed defending Stalingrad. I have seen courage in many forms, Captain Brooks, but what you and your drivers have done, driving through a war zone to help an ally, this is courage of a different kind. It would be wrong to let political games destroy something worthy of respect. The two women stood in silence for a moment, sharing an understanding that transcended nationality and ideology. They were soldiers, yes, but also women navigating a war that had been designed by and for men. Finding ways to survive and succeed, despite systems that often worked against them. I'll speak to my officers tonight, Madison said finally. Thank you for the warning, Natasha. Be careful, Captain. Volkhov is dangerous, and he has allies in unexpected places. Trust no one completely, not even those who seem friendly. Madison returned to camp and immediately gathered her senior officers in the command truck. Sarah, Anna, Beth, Rosa, and Maggie assembled quickly, recognizing the urgency in Madison's summons. When she laid out Natasha's warning, their reactions varied from anger to calculation to grim acceptance. Let me get this straight, Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled fury. We drive 300 trucks through hell, deliver everything they asked for, and now they want to steal our vehicles and strand us here? It's one faction, not the entire Soviet command, Madison clarified. But yes, that's the threat. Beth leaned back, her strategic mind already working through options. If we try to leave now, before the offensive, Volkhov could block us using security concerns. If we wait until after the offensive, we risk being forgotten in the chaos. Neither option is good. Natasha suggested we make ourselves indispensable during the offensive, Madison explained. Prove our value so that keeping the trucks becomes a liability rather than an asset. Rosa snorted. So we volunteer for more danger to prove we deserve to leave? That's some twisted logic. It's survival logic, Anna countered, her knowledge of Soviet thinking coming into play. In the Soviet system, political considerations often override military ones. We need to shift the political calculus by making our military value undeniable. Maggie had been quiet, but now she spoke up. I've been monitoring radio traffic. The offensive is going to be massive, multiple fronts, coordinated attacks, the works. If it succeeds, the Red Army will push the Germans back hundreds of kilometers. They'll need every truck they can get, just to keep up with their own advance. Madison nodded, seeing the picture come together. So we position ourselves as the solution to their logistics problems. We don't wait to be asked, we offer specific capabilities that make us too valuable to lose. What kind of capabilities? Sarah asked. Rapid response supply runs, Madison said, the plan forming as she spoke. The Soviet logistics system is built for set-piece battles, not fluid advances. But we're trained for flexibility, for operating independently in contested territory. We offer to run critical supplies to advancing units, to exploit breakthroughs that their traditional supply chains can't support quickly enough. Beth whistled low. That puts us right in the teeth of the fighting. Every supply run would be through territory that's barely secured, if it's secured at all. It's also exactly the kind of capability that wins battles, Anna observed. If we can keep advanced units supplied during the crucial hours of exploitation, we could be the difference between a local success and a strategic breakthrough. The risk is enormous, Rosa said bluntly. We'd be operating in conditions even more dangerous than the initial journey. Some of our people might not make it back. Madison looked at each of her officers, seeing her own doubts reflected in their faces. This was the moment that would define her command, the choice between safety and mission success, between following orders and achieving objectives. I won't order anyone to volunteer for this, she said carefully. This goes beyond our original mission parameters. Every driver deserves the choice. We'll present the situation honestly, the political threat, the proposed solution, the risks involved, and let each woman decide for herself. And if some refuse? Sarah asked. Then they stay in the rear area, help with basic logistics, and we operate with whoever volunteers. No judgment, no penalties. This is too dangerous to force anyone into. The meeting broke up, and Madison prepared for the most difficult briefing of her career. The next morning, she assembled all 300 drivers and laid out the situation with brutal honesty. She explained Commissar Volkhov's intentions, Natasha's warning, and the proposed solution. She made clear the additional dangers, the violation of their original orders, the possibility that some of them might not survive. I'm asking for volunteers, she concluded, to form rapid response supply teams during the Soviet offensive. You'll be driving into active combat zones, running supplies to advanced units, operating with minimal support in maximum danger. I can't promise you'll all come back. I can only promise that what you do will matter, that it might be the difference between victory and defeat, and that it's the best chance we have of completing our mission and getting everyone home. The silence that followed felt eternal. Madison watched 300 faces processing the information, weighing personal safety against mission success, fear against duty. She saw doubt, saw fear, saw the natural human desire to choose safety. Then Private Dorothy Williams stood up. I didn't join this convoy to play it safe, ma'am. I volunteer. Sarah Chun rose. I'm in. Anna Petrov stood. For my cousins in the Red Army, I volunteer. Beth Montgomery, Rosa Martinez, Maggie O'Brien, one by one, Madison's senior officers stood, their commitment clear. And then, like a wave spreading through ranks, the rest of the convoy rose to their feet. Within minutes, all 300 drivers were standing, each one volunteering for extended combat operations despite the risks. Madison felt her throat tighten with emotion. You're sure? All of you. We started this together, Dorothy called out, and we'll finish it together. That's what the Daughters of Thunder do. The nickname had stuck, and now Madison heard it repeated by dozens of voices, turning into a chant that rolled across the assembly area. Daughters of Thunder! Daughters of Thunder! Madison let them have the moment, understanding that this collective decision had transformed her command from a military unit into something deeper, a band of sisters, bound by shared purpose and mutual trust. Whatever happened in the coming days, they would face it together. She raised her hand for silence. All right, Daughters of Thunder. We've got 4 days to prepare. We're going to organize into rapid response teams, practice coordination with Soviet units, and develop tactics for operating in fluid combat conditions. By the time this offensive starts, we'll be the best damn logistic support force on the Eastern Front. The preparation that followed was intense and focused. Madison organized her 300 trucks into 30 teams of 10 vehicles each, with each team capable of independent operation. She assigned experienced commanders to each team: Sarah, Anna, Beth, and 27 other proven leaders who had demonstrated capability during the initial journey. Soviet liaison officers helped them understand Red Army communication protocols, recognition signals, and tactical doctrines. Madison's drivers learned to identify Soviet unit insignia, to navigate using Soviet maps and coordinates, to communicate with Soviet commanders who might not speak English. The cultural and linguistic barriers were significant, but necessity drove rapid learning. Natasha Volkhov proved invaluable during this period, serving as a bridge between American and Soviet military cultures. She helped Madison understand the Soviet command structure, advised on how to work within Soviet bureaucratic systems, and quietly identified which Soviet officers were sympathetic to the convoy's mission. Volkhov has been gathering support, Natasha warned during one of their planning sessions. He has convinced some commanders that American presence in Soviet operations represents ideological contamination. Others he has won over with promises of political favor. What about Zhukov? Madison asked. Where does he stand? The Marshal remains supportive, but he is focused on the offensive. He has explicitly ordered that your convoy not be impeded, but he will not spend political capital protecting you from administrative obstacles. You must make your own way, prove your own value. We will, Madison promised. The night before the offensive, Madison walked through her camp one final time. 300 trucks sat ready, crews sleeping in and around their vehicles, weapons cleaned and loaded, supplies carefully distributed. She found Sarah sitting on her truck's hood, staring at the stars. Can't sleep? Madison asked, climbing up to join her. Thinking about tomorrow, Sarah replied. About what we're getting into. This is different from the journey here, you know? Then we were just passing through the war. Tomorrow, we're going to be part of it. Having second thoughts? Sarah shook her head. No, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. We've been lucky so far, Madison. Really lucky. Tomorrow, that luck might run out. Madison didn't try to reassure her with false confidence. Sarah deserved better than that. You're right. Tomorrow could be the day our luck runs out. It could be the day some of us don't come back. But Sarah, I've never been prouder to serve with anyone than I am to serve with you and the rest of these women. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Together, Sarah echoed, and in that word, Madison heard both promise and acceptance. The offensive began at dawn with an artillery barrage that seemed to shake the very earth. Madison watched from a command post as thousands of Soviet guns opened fire simultaneously, transforming the German positions into a hellscape of fire and steel. The barrage lasted for 2 hours, reducing fortifications to rubble and defenders to traumatized shells. Then came the infantry waves of Soviet soldiers advancing behind the creeping artillery barrage, supported by tanks that rolled forward like mechanical avalanches. Madison saw the Red Army in full offensive fury, a military machine that had learned harsh lessons in the fires of earlier defeats and now applied those lessons with devastating effect. Breakthrough came faster than anyone expected. By midday, Soviet armor had penetrated the German defensive lines and was racing into the operational depth, seeking to exploit the rupture before the Germans could establish new defensive positions. This was the moment Madison had prepared for, the critical window when success or failure would depend on keeping those advanced units supplied. Brooks to all teams, she called into the radio. Execute Operation Thunder. Team Alpha, you're assigned to the 3rd Guards Tank Corps. Team Beta, support the 47th Rifle Division. All teams, check in when you reach your assigned units. The convoy exploded into action, 30 teams of 10 trucks each racing toward different sectors of the breakthrough. Madison led Team Alpha herself, Sarah at her side, following directions from a Soviet liaison officer, who guided them toward the Tank Corps' last reported position. The journey into the combat zone was nothing like the controlled approach of their initial mission. This was chaos-burning vehicles, crater-pocked roads, scattered groups of German soldiers either fleeing or trying to organize defensive positions. Madison's team drove through it all, trusting in speed and audacity to carry them through. They found the 3rd Guards Tank Corps 5 kilometers beyond the initial breakthrough. A colonel with a bandaged arm directing operations from a command tank. His eyes widened in disbelief as 10 American trucks pulled up beside his position. Who the hell are you? He demanded in Russian. Anna, riding in the second truck, translated for Madison. "We're logistics support, Colonel. We've got ammunition, fuel, and food. Where do you need it?" The colonel's skepticism transformed into desperate gratitude. His tanks had outrun their supply lines, and ammunition was already running low. "You can actually deliver what we need? Right here, right now?" "That's why we're here," Madison confirmed through Anna. "Tell us what you need, and we'll get it distributed." For the next 3 hours, Madison's team performed a logistics miracle. They distributed ammunition to tanks whose guns had nearly fallen silent. They refueled vehicles that were running on fumes. They delivered food to crews who hadn't eaten in 12 hours. And they did it all while German artillery tried to find the range, while enemy aircraft strafed the area. While the battle raged around them, other teams reported similar successes across the breakthrough zones. Team Beta kept a rifle division supplied during a critical bridge crossing. Team Gamma delivered anti-tank ammunition to a position just minutes before a German counterattack. Team after team proved that the Daughters of Thunder could deliver supplies under the most extreme conditions imaginable. But success came with a price. Team Delta lost 2 trucks to German artillery, the vehicles and their crews simply disappearing in clouds of fire and steel. Team Echo's commander, Lieutenant Patricia Hayes, was wounded by shrapnel while coordinating a supply distribution. Though she refused evacuation and continued directing her team from a medic station, by nightfall, Madison's convoy had made the difference between breakthrough and exploitation, between local success and strategic advance. Soviet units that should have stalled from lack of supplies instead continued their advance, pushing the Germans back in a rout that would become one of the war's decisive moments. Madison regrouped. Her teams at a captured German supply depot, taking stock of their situation. 23 trucks damaged, 6 destroyed completely, 37 drivers wounded, and 5 killed in action. The butcher's bill was steep, but the mission's success was undeniable. "Brooks to all teams," she transmitted as darkness fell. "Outstanding work today. You've proven that the Daughters of Thunder can operate in the hardest conditions imaginable. Get some rest, repair what you can, and prepare for tomorrow. The offensive continues, and so do we." As she signed off, Natasha appeared beside her truck, accompanied by a Soviet general Madison didn't recognize. The general's expression was grave but respectful. "Captain Brooks," he said through Natasha's translation, "I am General Petrov, deputy commander of this front. I must inform you that Commissar Volkhov has filed a formal complaint about your operations, claiming you violated Soviet operational security and exceeded your authority." Madison's heart sank. Even success wasn't enough to satisfy her enemies. However, General Petrov continued, and Madison caught the hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Marshal Zhukov has personally intervened. He has issued orders designating your convoy as an integral part of front-level logistics operations. Commissar Volkhov's complaint has been dismissed as politically motivated interference with military operations." Relief flooded through Madison. "So we're clear to continue?" "More than that," Natasha interjected, unable to hide her smile. "Zhukov has requested that you coordinate directly with front headquarters for tomorrow's operations. He wants the Daughters of Thunder to support the main exploitation force. Captain Brooks, you have impressed one of the Soviet Union's greatest commanders. That is no small achievement." But Madison was already thinking ahead to tomorrow's challenges, to the risks her drivers would face, to the promises she'd made to get them all home safely. Success today didn't guarantee survival tomorrow. And the war was far from over. The battle for the Eastern Front had entered a new phase. And the Daughters of Thunder were at its very heart. The offensive's second day brought new challenges and deeper penetration into German-held territory. Madison stood in a Soviet command bunker, studying maps that showed a breakthrough expanding into a genuine collapse of German defensive lines. Red arrows indicated Soviet advances of 20, 30, sometimes 40 kilometers beyond the original front line. Blue Arrow's German units were scattered and retreating, their defensive cohesion shattered. "Your trucks made this possible," General Petrov said, pointing to specific points on the map. "Here, and here, and here units that should have stalled instead continued advancing because your drivers delivered supplies under fire. The Germans are in full retreat, and we have the opportunity to turn this retreat into a rout." Madison studied the map with a practiced eye, noting the distances involved, the condition of the roads, the positions of German forces that might interfere with supply runs. "What do you need from us today, General?" Petrov circled an area 50 kilometers behind the advancing Soviet spearheads. "There is a town here, Mogilev. We will capture it by this afternoon. But it sits at a critical road junction. 3 highways converge there. If we can establish a supply depot at Mogilev and keep it functioning, we can support a sustained advance for another week." "You want us to set up and run a forward supply depot in territory that will be under German artillery fire and possible counterattack?" "Yes," Petrov said simply. "Can you do it?" Madison considered the request. It meant splitting her convoy, leaving a significant portion exposed at a fixed location while the rest continued mobile operations. It violated every principle of logistics flexibility she'd been taught. It also happened to be exactly what the situation required. "We can do it," she confirmed. "I'll need Soviet security forces to protect the depot and priority for air defense assets." "You will have both," Petrov promised. "How many trucks do you need for the depot operation?" 60 trucks, 15 teams. That leaves me 45 teams for continued rapid response operations." They worked out the details, and within hours, Madison was reorganizing her convoy again. She assigned Beth Montgomery to command the depot operation, recognizing her friend's organizational skills and tactical judgment. The rest of the teams would continue mobile operations, racing supplies to advancing units before Soviet logistics could catch up. The depot teams moved out first, following the advancing Soviet forces toward Mogilev. Madison led the mobile teams in support of the 6th Guards Army, which was pushing toward the Dnieper River crossings. The pace of operations was exhausting supply runs that should have taken hours compressed into minutes. Decisions made on the fly with incomplete information. Constant adaptation to a battlefield situation that changed by the hour dot. It was during one of these runs that Madison encountered Captain Viktor Sokolov, a tank company commander whose unit had been leading the advance. His tanks had penetrated deep into German territory, far beyond the reach of conventional supply lines, and were now nearly out of ammunition and fuel. "You are angels," Victor said when Madison's team appeared with fuel trucks and ammunition carriers. His English was barely functional, but his gratitude transcended language barriers. "My tanks were about to become monuments. Now we can continue the fight." As Madison's team distributed supplies, Victor explained the tactical situation. His company had reached the Dnieper, but found the bridges destroyed. Engineers were working to establish pontoon crossings, but they needed time that Victor's tanks could provide by holding off German units trying to establish defensive positions on the western bank. "How long can you hold?" Madison asked through Anna's translation. "With your supplies?" "Maybe 6 hours. Without them, we would already be retreating." 6 hours. Madison calculated quickly. In 6 hours, the engineers could establish at least 2 pontoon bridges, potentially allowing the entire 6th Guards Army to cross the Dnieper before the Germans could consolidate a new defensive line. But only if Victor's tanks stayed supplied. "I'll be back in 3 hours with another load," Madison promised. "You hold that position, Captain, and we'll keep you supplied." Victor clasped her hand, his grip firm. "I believe you. I have seen what you American women can do. You are not like any soldiers I have known." The supply runs to Victor's position became a lifeline for the entire crossing operation. Every 3 hours, Madison or one of her team commanders would race ammunition and fuel to the tanks holding the bridgehead. German artillery made each run a gauntlet of fire, and German aircraft turned the road into a shooting gallery. But the Daughters of Thunder kept their promise. On the 3rd run, Madison's truck was bracketed by artillery fire, shells landing close enough that the blast wave lifted the vehicle's wheels off the ground. Sarah fought the wheel, keeping them on the road while Madison worked the radio, calling for Soviet air support to suppress the German guns. "This is insane," Sarah shouted over the explosions. "We're going to get killed doing this." "But we're not dead yet," Madison shouted back, seeing Victor's position ahead. "Just a little further." They made it, delivered their cargo, and raced back through the artillery barrage with empty trucks. Madison counted 3 new bullet holes in her windshield and decided not to mention them to Sarah. Meanwhile, Beth's depot operation at Mogilev was facing its own challenges. The town had been captured as predicted, but German forces were launching constant counterattacks trying to retake the critical junction. Beth found herself not just organizing logistics, but also directing defensive operations, coordinating with Soviet infantry to repel German assaults while simultaneously keeping supplies flowing to advancing units. "Brooks, this is Montgomery," Beth's voice crackled over the radio during one particularly intense German attack. "We're holding, but it's getting hairy. The Germans know how important this depot is, and they're throwing everything at us. Do you need reinforcement?" Madison asked, already calculating which team she could spare. "Negative. The Soviet infantry is solid, and we're managing. But Madison ... Some of our people are getting scared. They signed up to drive trucks, not fight off German attacks." Madison understood the unspoken concern. Her drivers were brave, capable, and determined, but they weren't infantry. Asking them to defend a fixed position against determined attacks pushed beyond their training and potentially beyond their psychological limits. "Beth, I need that depot operational," Madison said carefully. "But not at the cost of our people's lives or sanity. If the situation becomes untenable, you have my authorization to evacuate. The mission matters, but our people matter more." "Understood." Montgomery out. The crisis at Mogilev resolved itself when Soviet reinforcements arrived. Fresh infantry divisions moving up to secure the depot and allow Beth's teams to focus on logistics rather than combat. But the incident highlighted the razor's edge on which the entire operation balanced success and disaster, separated by the slimmest of margins. By the offensive's 4th day, the Daughters of Thunder had become legend among Soviet forces. Stories circulated about American women who drove through artillery fire, who delivered supplies when everyone said it was impossible, who fought when necessary and never complained about the conditions. Soviet soldiers began calling them Gromovi Sestry, Thunder Sisters, a title that Madison's drivers wore with fierce pride, but fame brought new dangers. Commissar Volkhov, unable to stop the convoy through political means, began looking for other ways to undermine their operations. Madison learned of his machinations through Natasha, who had been quietly monitoring the Commissar's activities. "He is trying to create incidents that will make your convoy look dangerous or unreliable," Natasha warned. "Delayed orders, accidentally misdirected supply requests, bureaucratic obstacles designed to cause failures he can then blame on your people. Can Zhukov stop him?" Zhukov is focused on the offensive and dealing with Stalin's constant demands for updates. He has protected you from direct action, but these subtle sabotages fall below his attention threshold. You will need to navigate them yourself. Madison shared this intelligence with her senior commanders, and they developed countermeasures. They established direct communication with Soviet combat units, bypassing the channels Volkhov could manipulate. They created redundancy in their supply chains, ensuring that failures in one area wouldn't cascade into broader breakdowns. They documented everything, building a paper trail that would prove their reliability despite Volkhov's interference. The Commissar's response was to escalate. On the offensive's sixth day, a critical supply convoy bound for the 3rd Guards Tank Corps was delayed by orders claiming security concerns. Madison recognized Volkhov's handiwork immediately. The delay would arrive just as the Tank Corps was preparing to exploit a breakthrough, potentially turning victory into stalemate. She made a decision that violated Soviet protocol but served the mission's needs. She bypassed the delay order entirely, sent the supplies directly to the Tank Corps through back roads, and personally delivered a message to Volkhov explaining that operational necessity had required immediate action. Volkhov's fury was spectacular. He summoned Madison to a formal disciplinary hearing, assembled a panel of political officers, and prepared to have her removed from command for insubordination. But he had underestimated both Madison's political awareness and the loyalty she'd built among Soviet combat commanders. The hearing took place in a commandeered school building. Madison standing before a long table of stern-faced commissars, while Volkhov detailed her violations of protocol. He painted a picture of an undisciplined officer whose disregard for proper channels threatened Soviet operational security. "How do you respond to these charges?" the senior commissar asked. Madison had prepared her defense carefully with Natasha's help. "Comrade Commissar, I acknowledge that I violated communication protocols. I do not acknowledge that this violated operational security or military necessity. The 3rd Guards Tank Corps needed supplies to exploit a breakthrough. Delay would have cost lives and opportunities. I delivered those supplies using the fastest and safest route available. The Tank Corps achieved its objectives. If following protocol means sacrificing military success, then I choose success." "Madison, we've already lost drivers. Dorothy Williams is dead. Patricia Hayes might never regain full use of her arm. How many more do we lose before we've proven enough?" The question hit home. Madison had attended every memorial service, written every condolence letter, carried the weight of every casualty. Sarah was right, the cost had already been steep. "I won't force this," Madison said finally. "This one has to be unanimous among the command staff. We all vote, and if even one person says no, we decline the mission. No judgment, no consequences." They voted in silence, each commander writing their decision on a slip of paper. Madison collected them, read them one by one. When she finished, she looked up at her officers with tears in her eyes. "Unanimous," she whispered. "All of us say yes." Sarah smiled sadly. "We're either the bravest women alive or the biggest fools." "Maybe both." "Definitely both," Beth agreed. "Let's go tell Petrov he has his convoy." "You admit to insubordination?" "I admit to prioritizing the mission over bureaucratic process, yes." Volkhov smiled, thinking he had trapped her. "Then you acknowledge you cannot be trusted to follow Soviet command authority." "I acknowledge that I can be trusted to achieve mission objectives despite obstacles, Comrade Commissar. Which, I believe, is why Marshal Zhukov authorized our presence in the first place." Before Volkhov could respond, the hearing room door opened and Viktor Sokolov walked in. Still wearing his tank commander's coveralls stained with oil and gunpowder. He saluted the commissars crisply. "Forgive the interruption, Comrade Commissars, but I could not allow this hearing to proceed without testimony from combat commanders who have worked with Captain Brooks and her convoy." Volkhov's face darkened. "This is irregular, Captain Sokolov. You were not summoned." "I summoned myself, Comrade Commissar, along with several colleagues." The door opened again, and a stream of Soviet officers entered, tank commanders, infantry colonels, artillery officers, even a general. They arranged themselves along the walls, their presence transforming the disciplinary hearing into something else entirely. Victor spoke for them all. "We are the commanders whose units Captain Brooks and her drivers have supplied under fire. We have watched them risk their lives to keep our soldiers fed, armed, and mobile. We have seen them perform logistics miracles that our own supply system could not achieve. And we are here to say that if insubordination produces such results, we need more of it. The senior commissar looked uncomfortable, caught between political loyalty to Volkhov and the practical reality of combat commanders united in defense of the American convoy. Captain Sokolov, are you suggesting we overlook violations of protocol? I am suggesting, Comrade Commissar, that battlefield success should outweigh administrative concerns. Captain Brooks delivered supplies that allowed my tanks to hold a critical bridgehead. That bridgehead enabled the entire 6th Guards Army to cross the Dnieper. Any punishment of Captain Brooks would be a punishment of military effectiveness itself. The hearing dissolved into chaos. Commissars arguing with combat officers. Volkhov trying to restore order while Victor and his colleagues presented a united front. In the end, the senior commissar dismissed the charges with a warning to Madison about following proper protocols in the future, a warning everyone understood to be face-saving theater. As Madison left the building, Victor caught up with her. That was dangerous what I did. Volkhov will not forget this interference. Why did you do it? Madison asked. You risked your career to defend someone you barely know. Victor's expression turned serious. In this war, I have seen courage of many kinds. The courage to assault fortified positions, to hold ground against impossible odds, to make the ultimate sacrifice. But you and your drivers show a different courage. The courage to do what is necessary rather than what is comfortable. That deserves defense, even at personal cost. Madison felt a lump in her throat. Thank you, Victor. I won't forget this. See that you don't, he replied with a grin. And next time my tanks need supplies, I expect the same impossible miracles. The confrontation with Volkhov marked a turning point. The commissar's attempt to discredit Madison had backfired, strengthening her position within the Soviet command structure. But it also made clear that the political battle was far from over. Volkhov would continue his campaign, just more subtly, more carefully, waiting for an opportunity to strike without the interference of sympathetic combat commanders. That opportunity came 3 days later, when an intelligence report revealed a gap in the German defensive lines, a 30-kilometer corridor, left undefended as German units retreated in disorder. Soviet High Command immediately recognized the opportunity. A rapid exploitation force could drive through that gap, penetrate deep into the German rear, and potentially encircle several enemy divisions, but the operation required speed and supplies in equal measure. The exploitation force would be cut off from conventional logistics, dependent entirely on aerial resupply, and the Daughters of Thunder. General Petrov presented the plan to Madison with characteristic directness. We are assembling a Shock Group 2 tank corps, 1 mechanized infantry division, and support elements. They will drive through the gap and advance as far as possible before the Germans can react. Your convoy will accompany them, providing supplies for the initial penetration, and then establishing forward supply points as they advance. Madison studied the operational map, seeing both the opportunity and the danger. The exploitation force would be operating 60 to 80 kilometers behind German lines, vulnerable to counterattack, dependent on a single supply corridor that German forces would desperately try to cut. If the operation succeeded, it could shorten the war by months. If it failed, an entire Soviet army group could be destroyed, and Madison's convoy with it. This is different from supporting the main advance, Madison observed. This is deep penetration into enemy territory with no secure logistics chain. Yes, Petrov agreed. Which is precisely why we need your convoy. Soviet logistics can support a broad front advance or a deep penetration, but not both simultaneously. Your trucks, your driver's skill at independent operations, your ability to move supplies through contested territory, these capabilities are perfect for this mission. And if the Germans cut our supply corridor? If we find ourselves surrounded? Then you fight your way out, same as the rest of the shock group. Captain Brooks, I will not lie to you, this operation carries extreme risk. But the potential reward justifies that risk. If we can encircle and destroy the German units in this sector, we open the road to Poland. Perhaps even to Germany itself. Madison thought of her brother James, of the promise she'd made to his memory, of the war that had consumed so many lives and needed to end. She thought of her drivers, the Daughters of Thunder, who had trusted her judgment this far. She thought of the strategic importance that hung on this decision, of the promise that the Daughters of Thunder could accomplish the impossible. How long do we have to decide? Madison asked. The shock group moves at dawn tomorrow. I need your answer in 3 hours. Madison gathered her commanders once more, and this time the discussion was different. They were no longer volunteers stepping into the unknown. They were veterans who understood the costs of combat operations, who had lost friends who knew exactly what they were agreeing to. This could be the mission that wins the war in the East, Anna said quietly, or the mission that destroys us completely. We've already proven ourselves, Rosa argued. We've done what we set out to do. Maybe it's time to take our trucks and go home. Beth shook her head. If we leave now, Volkhov wins. He'll claim we abandoned Soviet forces in their hour of need, that women can't handle sustained combat operations. Everything we've accomplished gets rewritten as a propaganda failure. So we risk everything, our lives, our mission, our trucks for politics? Rosa shot back. Not for politics, Madison interjected. For the mission. Our original mission was to deliver supplies and prove that women could handle combat logistics. We've delivered the supplies, but we haven't proven the second part yet. Not completely. If we walk away from the hardest operation, what does that prove? Sarah had been quiet, but now she spoke. It proves we're human. That we know our limits. The deep penetration operation launched at dawn with the kind of fury that only the Red Army could muster. 2 tank corps, over 400 tanks smashed through the German gap like a steel fist, with mechanized infantry and Madison's convoy following close behind. The shock group penetrated 10 kilometers in the first hour, 20 kilometers by midday, and by evening they were 40 kilometers behind. German lines. Madison's teams operated in a new mode, forward supply points, established and abandoned with fluid rapidity. Supplies delivered to moving formations, constant adaptation to a battlefield situation that evolved minute by minute. They were no longer just logistics, they were part of the combat force itself, their movements synchronized with tactical operations. On the second day, the Germans realized what was happening and began desperate counterattacks to cut the Soviet supply corridor. Madison found herself directing defensive operations as German forces tried to overrun supply points before they could be evacuated. Her drivers fought with rifles and machine guns, defending trucks loaded with ammunition while Soviet reinforcements raced to their aid. It was during one of these attacks that Madison's leadership was tested most severely. A German tank company broke through Soviet screening forces and drove straight for a supply point commanded by Lieutenant Sarah Chun. Madison listened to the radio traffic as Sarah organized a desperate defense with only trucks and small arms against armored vehicles. All units fall back. Madison ordered. Chun, abandon the supplies and get your people out. Negative. Sarah's voice came back, calm despite the chaos. We've got infantry ammunition here that the 47th Rifle Division needs within the hour. If we abandon it, those soldiers go into battle with empty rifles. Sarah, tanks will slaughter you. You can't fight tanks with trucks. Watch me. What followed became another legend of the Daughters of Thunder. Sarah organized her 10 trucks into a defensive barricade, created improvised anti-tank obstacles from supply crates, and led her drivers in a fighting withdrawal that delayed the German tanks long enough for Soviet anti-tank guns to arrive. She lost 3 trucks and 2 drivers, but she saved the ammunition and proved that courage came in many forms. When Madison reached the position after the Germans had been driven off, she found Sarah sitting on the running board of her damaged truck, hands shaking with delayed reaction. Madison sat beside her, no words necessary. 2 friends sharing the weight of command. The deep penetration continued for 5 more days, pushing 70 kilometers behind German lines before Soviet High Command ordered consolidation. The shot group had achieved its objectives, 3 German divisions encircled, critical transportation hubs captured, the entire German defensive structure in chaos. The Daughters of Thunder had made it possible, delivering over 800 tons of supplies to forward positions that conventional logistics couldn't reach, but the cost was heavy. Madison had started the operation with 298 trucks, 2 lost to earlier combat. She finished with 261, 37 vehicles destroyed, 18 drivers killed, 43 wounded. Each loss felt personal, each death a weight on Madison's soul. The return journey to Allied lines came 3 weeks after the deep penetration ended. Soviet forces had advanced so far that the route back crossed territory that had been enemy-held just weeks before. Commissar Volkhov made one final attempt to keep the trucks, but Marshal Zhukov personally intervened, issuing orders that brooked no contradiction. "You have earned your return," Zhukov told Madison at their final meeting. "More than earned it. You and your drivers have proven that courage and capability know no gender. The Red Army will not forget the Daughters of Thunder." The convoy that rolled west toward Allied lines was smaller and more scarred than the one that had arrived. But it carried something more valuable than any cargo proof: that women could perform under the most extreme combat conditions. That determination and skill mattered more than outdated prejudices. They crossed back into Allied-controlled territory on a gray morning in late July. American and British flags replacing Soviet banners at checkpoints. Madison felt something release in her chest. They had made it. Against all odds, through combat and politics, they had completed their mission. General Eisenhower himself was waiting at the reception point, along with a crowd of reporters and military officials. As Madison climbed down from her truck, exhausted and covered in the dust of 1,000 kilometers, Eisenhower stepped forward and saluted. "Captain Brooks," he said formally, "on behalf of the United States Army and the Allied Command, I thank you for the successful completion of an impossible mission." Madison returned the salute, then gestured to the trucks behind her. "It wasn't just me, sir. It was every woman in this convoy. The Daughters of Thunder." The reporters surged forward with questions, photographers capturing images of women who had driven through hell. But Madison only had eyes for her remaining drivers. These sisters-in-arms who had trusted her judgment, followed her orders, and proven themselves capable of anything. Madison stood in the War Department briefing room in Washington, presenting the final report on the convoy operation to a room full of generals and policymakers. Charts showed supply tonnage delivered, tactical impacts of logistic support, casualty rates, and vehicle losses. But the real story was in the faces of the officers' listening skepticism transformed into grudging respect, doubt replaced by recognition. In conclusion, Madison said, "The all-female convoy operation demonstrated that women can perform combat logistics roles with the same effectiveness as their male counterparts. The strategic impact of our operations contributed directly to the success of the Soviet summer offensive. I recommend that the Army expand opportunities for women in logistics and support roles, based on capability rather than gender." A colonel in the back raised his hand. "Captain Brooks, you suffered 18 killed in action. Some would argue this proves women shouldn't be in combat zones." Madison had expected this question. "Sir, the casualty rate for our convoy was actually lower than comparable male-driven operations in similar circumstances. Those 18 women died doing their duty, same as any soldier. Their gender is irrelevant to their sacrifice. The briefing ended, and Madison walked out into the Washington sunshine, feeling the weight of the past year finally lifting. She had received orders promoting her to major and assigning her to the Army's Logistics Planning Division, where she would help shape policies for women's roles in future operations. But that was the future. Today, she had one more obligation to fulfill. The memorial service was held at Arlington National Cemetery, a small gathering to honor the Daughters of Thunder who hadn't made it home. Madison stood with Sarah, Anna, Beth, Rosa, and Maggie, the Corps Command team who had survived everything the war could throw at them. As the bugler played taps, Madison thought about Dorothy Williams, Patricia Hayes, who had succumbed to her wounds 2 weeks after returning, and all the others who had paid the ultimate price. They had been drivers and mechanics, farm girls and factory workers, women who had refused to accept limitations and had proven that courage knew no gender. They made it matter, Sarah whispered beside her. Everything we did, it mattered. Yes, Madison agreed, thinking of her brother James, of the promise she'd made to his memory. It mattered. Historical note: narrator speaks directly to audience. The story of Madison Brooks and the Daughters of Thunder is a work of fiction, but it's inspired by real women who served with distinction during World War II. Women like the Soviet night witches who flew combat missions, the American WWII who ferried military aircraft, the British women of the SOE who served behind enemy lines, and countless others who refused to let gender define their contributions to the war effort. While the specific events in this story didn't happen, they could have. The courage, determination, and capability displayed by the Daughters of Thunder reflect the real qualities of women who served in every theater of World War II. Often against institutional prejudice and cultural expectations, the true legacy of these women isn't just in their wartime accomplishments, but in how they permanently changed what society believed women could achieve. They drove trucks, flew planes, served in combat zones, and proved that ability matters more than gender. Their service opened doors that would never fully close again, paving the way for future generations of women to serve without limitation. Madison Brooks and her Daughters of Thunder are fictional, but the spirit they embody, the refusal to accept artificial limits, the determination to prove capability through action, the courage to face danger for a cause greater than oneself, that spirit was very real, and its impact continues to resonate today. Creating stories of this depth and length requires tremendous research, careful writing, and hours of narration. Each story is crafted to provide you with an immersive experience that's more than just entertainment. It's a journey into history, humanity, and the incredible capabilities of the human spirit. If you've enjoyed this story, I have a favor to ask. Please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another epic tale. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who appreciates great storytelling and historical fiction. Your likes, comments, and shares help this channel grow and allow me to continue creating these detailed, novel-length narratives. What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Historical fiction from other eras? Different perspectives on World War II? Epic tales from other conflicts or time periods? Let me know in the comments. Your feedback shapes what stories I tell next. Thank you for spending this time with me and the Daughters of Thunder. Until our next story, remember, history is filled with ordinary people who did extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. May we all find that courage when we need it most. Subscribe, share, and I'll see you in the next story.